into developing one of these plans, okay? You then take your plan and you submit it to the regulator, and they review it, and they say, well, no, I think you should measure this a little more often, or you need to do this type of work, okay? And then those are then part of your operating license. So your license will say, okay, you have to do a groundwater survey every year and submit it to the government, all right? So that's in this MMV plan. The other thing that happens to these MMV plans is, as new technologies get developed, they can be incorporated into these things too. So they're live documents, all right? You start off doing things and realize, wow, we did it every 6 months, it didn't change, so maybe we can do it every year, all right? So these things, this will be done, and these are public. So you can look up, if you wanted to, you could go look up the MMV plan for Shell's Quest project in Alberta and read 100 pages of what they have to do to make sure they keep their license, all right? So this is how we tell. Now I'm gonna run through a couple of examples of some things that are in here that you might be interested in. To do that, I'm gonna show you some stuff from Aquastore. So I'll just mention what is Aquastore if you don't know. This is operating at Estevan, Saskatchewan, so it's not too far from here, a bit west of here in south. It's a research project that's managed by the Petroleum Technology Research Center at the University of Regina. And it's associated with the Boundary Dam capture unit. And so the source of the CO2 is a coal-fired power plant, a commercial-scale coal-fired power plant. And the idea was to take the CO2 that wasn't being used, sold to Whitecap for EOR, and put that underground, and to show that it could be safely stored. That was the original objective in 2008, okay? And so since 2013, we've been injecting and monitoring and showing that this actually works. Okay, so there you go. There's the power plant, Boundary Dam, and I think that provides about 20% of the power to all of Saskatchewan during peak load, so it's a big operation, okay? Dirty coal-fired power plant with 100% CO2 capture on unit number 3, so essentially it's zero emission coal-fired power plant, and the CO2 is captured and put into our injection well, and the rest of the CO2 goes up a pipeline to near the Weyburn oil field for storage in that project. Okay, so that's the project. Now, you heard about geology. Geology matters. Geology creates the isolation between shallow water that you would worry about, that you would use, and where we're going to put the CO2. And so this cartoon, on the right-hand side of this thing, we've got a whole list. So first of all, at the very top is to scale the sort of trees and buildings and farms that sit up on the land surface. And you've heard a few times that all the shallow water that you would ever use for drinking, irrigation, dugouts, that all sits in the top 100 meters or so. And we're injecting at 3.4 kilometers, 3,400 meters, about 10,000 feet, or about 2 miles below the land surface. Okay, that's at the very bottom, down there in the deadwood. Now, the oil companies produce oil above us. Okay, so we're injecting below even where they get the oil from. So the Manville, the Midale, those are all oil hydrocarbon producing units on the right. Now, what makes this a great place to store CO2? It's also found in Manitoba, it's also found in Alberta, so the Western Canada is a great place. We have these layers that are going to block anything from moving from below to above. And we know that by looking at the chemistry, the pressures, all this kind of stuff. So we're injecting at the very bottom. You have the Prairie Evaporite Salt Unit, which is 200 meters thick, okay? Above that, you have the Watrous, which traps all the oil, most of it in Saskatchewan. And then above that, you have 800 meters of shale, which almost nothing can move through, okay? So this is a great place. So geology creates the isolation between the shallow water and where we're going to inject. Okay, now, this is not a class. I'm not going to go through this all, but this is some of the elements to what's found in the Aquastore MMV plan. So again, the purpose, project planning and plume monitoring, public assurance, and then looking for various research things. And we do 2 kinds of things, 2 broad categories. We do things that are done at the surface, and we do things that are done down the borehole, because we have an injection borehole, and we have an observation borehole. Okay? So we do two kinds of things, and they have different purposes. So we have a bunch of things that are used to figure out what's the shape of the plume of CO2. Okay? The next group is what are things, as we inject, are we deforming the land surface at all? Okay? And the final one down there is, if we're injecting, are we going to have any signs of any leakage? Okay? And on the right-hand side, we do a whole bunch of downhole things to do things like pressure measurement, temperature measurement, fluid sampling, listening for any microseismic events, etc. So all these things are part of the MMV plant. And I picked some pictures of about 4 or 5 of these to show you why we do and some results. So the first thing, okay, this is a really complicated diagram, and there's no equations on here, thank God. But we use what are called numerical models, computer models, okay? So we build a computer model of how the system behaves. And we use all the input data, so the geology, the well logs, etc. We build this model in the upper right-hand corner. And then we do some injection, and then we take the results of the system and feed that back into an updated model. And as we inject CO2 every year, you have to update the model and see if the CO2 plume in the ground that you measure using these other methods matches the model, okay? And that you submit to the government to say, well, it's behaving as we modeled it and expect it to be. So a lot of this is mathematical modeling to make sure. And there's, a lot of very, very expensive computers and really smart people that do this kind of work, not me. Now, the next thing we do are a bunch of techniques that measure in the borehole. And these are direct measurements in a borehole. And we use something called a saturation log. And there are various types of these. I won't bore you with the details. But what happens is this is deployed on a wire log and a cable down in the borehole. It has a sensor that measures the CO2 around the edge of the borehole. So you can lower this thing down the borehole, and ideally, if you're doing your job right, the CO2 will be found where you inject it, okay? And you can measure then, every time you do it, month after month after month after month, and you can see the CO2 saturation changing. It also is very useful, because if the CO2 is going to get out of the confining layer, it'll show up above the confining layer near the borehole first, right? That's where you're putting it in. So this is a primary tool we use to make sure the CO2 is staying in the zone where we put it. Okay, so saturation logging. Now, the next thing is we use something called the temperature log. And this is kind of high tech, pretty cool. It's a fiber optic cable that's installed along the borehole, and it's very sensitive to temperature measurements. And the ground is pretty warm the deeper you go, and CO2 is quite cold. So when you inject CO2, you get a temperature signal in the borehole. And you can measure this fiber optically every second if you wanted to see the temperature profile. And look again, if CO2 is leaking out of the borehole, it will show up as a temperature anomaly, okay? So we do this continuously as we're injecting CO2 to make sure there's no CO2 above the borehole in the subsurface. So you hear lots about DTS. Okay, now the other one that we do, and we're pretty famous for this, is seismic. So this is standard oil industry seismic, except what we do is do it to measure where CO2 is going. So the idea is you run a seismic survey, 3D seismic survey over the area, and you measure the response of the ground without any CO2. That's your baseline survey. And then what we're going to do is run that survey again after we inject CO2, and we're going to look for the difference in the acoustic properties of the subsurface. Okay? Sounds pretty cool. It works pretty cool. So here is a set of time slices of measurements of CO2 being injected. So on the upper left there, you'll see our injection well and the observation well, which is 150 meters away from it. And I've got a circle there, which is a 500-meter radius. So there's after 36,000 tons of injection. You can see a little blob of CO2. There's 100,000 tons, 150,000 tons, 272,000 tons, and then the one from last year, 566,000 tons. So we estimated that the CO2 would be somewhere within that 500-meter plume after 500,000, and it's pretty close to where we thought it would be, right? So this is a direct measurement from the surface of CO2 moving around 3,400 meters underground. Okay, so you can do it. Now, the other question that comes up all the time is, well, will this cause earthquakes? All right, does injection cause earthquakes? And the answer is, all injection causes very, very tiny microseismic events. They're so small, you can't barely measure them. And we've been measuring at this site since before we started injecting. We have 5 broadband seismometers, okay? So there's 5 of them scattered around the site, and there's a kilometer scale bar there. So we have 5 of those. And then when we did this for the seismic surveys, we installed 620 permanent geophones in the ground. Each of these is battery operated, so we can turn them on and listen continuously for any microseismic events. And we've been doing that since 2012, okay? And we haven't seen anything detectable after injecting 600,000 tons of CO2. And we presented this around the world, part of our team, and they said, oh wow, you didn't see anything, how do you know your system is working? Well, there's a picture of the coal mine right there, and every afternoon around 2 o'clock, they blast the coal for the coal mine, and we have to filter that out of our signal because we know that it happens every day at around 2 o'clock, right? We also take out all the big earthquakes that our system detects. So we basically look for anything attributed to the injection, and we haven't seen anything whatsoever. So it is possible to inject CO2, 600,000 tons, without having any impacts, microseismic events whatsoever. We've measured potash mine blasts, all kinds of things with this array, but nothing to do with injection. Now, the final thing I'll show is close to my own heart, the groundwater monitoring program. So there's the site, is at the center of that circle. That this kind of shaded area is we estimated after 25 years of injection, the plume would be within that 3-kilometer radius around the borehole. So we focused our monitoring efforts in that 3-kilometer area, and we established 35 groundwater monitoring stations. But what's interesting about this site is that the first thing we did is we went to the 6 closest landowners, people who live. And those are you can see them there, DW 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So those are landowners that I met at one of the very first meetings like this, and I said, would you like to be part of our monitoring network? We will come to your house, we will sample your well beforehand, we'll give you the results of the samples for free, you don't have to pay for anything, and every year we'll come back and talk to you about, has your well changed water, has anything happened? Chemistry is the same as it was before, do you have any concerns, etc. So part of the outreach program that's been very successful. And it's been so successful that 2 of the landowners have finally said, look, yeah, stop, you don't have to do that anymore because we believe you that it's working. So you gotta have that. We also measure some deeper groundwater monitoring wells off-site. We have some, obviously part of the plant has ash lagoon sites. And then one of my graduate students installed 19 piezometers in a cross that we go and we measure every year. Okay, so 35 of these things get measured every year. And I'll tell you 2 things. The first one is, in this part of rural Saskatchewan, the local clean water is really lousy. Okay, it doesn't taste good, it's full of sulfate and full of weird things. So that's what these dots all over the place mean, that the water quality is hugely variable. Most of the people don't drink it, and most of their cattle won't drink it either, but they use it for various things on their farms. The second part is that it's the most boring presentation to give, because I have 35 graphs like this, more than 10 years of data, and not a single parameter has ever changed in 10 years of doing this. So no impacts, no changes on the near surface groundwater since we've been injecting here. Okay? So, this is something in the MMV plan to measure the water and make sure you measure it every year, and it's part of our license to operate. If we didn't do this, we wouldn't be able to inject. So, my final slide, 5 kind of takeaways from what we've seen by doing this on million-ton projects, multiple places in Western Canada and other places around the world. The first one is that our project, Aquastore, Weyburn Midale, Shell Quest, these big projects demonstrate that you can do a large-scale CO2 injection safely. Okay. The second thing is that we know where the CO2 is going. We monitor the CO2 using these MMV plans, and that's how we tell what's going on. In Western Canada, you've heard that this is a really technically favorable place to do this. We have lots of isolating barriers between the deepest parts where we inject this stuff and anything near the surface that would be wanting to use. My knowledge, and I'll argue that I have pretty extensive knowledge of this, there have been no documented impacts to potable water aquifers from CCS projects in Canada. Okay, and finally, and it's a tribute to you, that one of the things us science geeks learned was that these projects, community engagement is critical to having these projects be successful. And you're demonstrating that by coming out tonight, and I think the team here is demonstrating committed to you to do this, to answer your questions. It's important to have these conversations, okay? I understand that not everybody's a fan of this, but at least you won't be listening to something you read by somebody somewhere posted on something, because you're going to hear from the people that have done this. And I urge you to, this is your chance to ask questions of anybody here. Sign up, ask those questions. And there's a picture of us having a community engagement meeting in Estevan at one of the companies. And I urge you to ask that question. So thank you all for listening, and I think we're going to move to the question and answer phase of the presentations now.
Okay. So yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you again to Krista and Dr. Bostrom. I will ask the Deep Sky folks just to come up here and join me. We do have an FAQ slide that we put together, mostly answers pulled from our FAQs that are live. Leon, you might as well come on up as well. So we're going to open the floor up to questions. We have this scheduled until about 8:30. If things are rolling along, we can continue this kind of open question and answer period for a bit longer. If we do end right at 8:30, Deep Sky folks will stick around. Feel free to take a photo of that slide or whatever, but like I said, those answers are available in our FAQs. Maybe just in a bit more of a succinct format here. Some of them have maybe a bit more thought out response. Obviously pressed for space on a PowerPoint slide, so if anything here needs more detail, please feel free to ask. I am going to have, I think, Jason be our, Jason's going to be, we need somebody to be the runner. You're going to be the moderator up here, and Jason's going to run with this.
So I think first question in the back there. Just with this.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Well, we are looking forward to some questions. And when you guys ask your questions, I'm just going to ask you to state your name and where you're from. Start it off. And don't do that. Please go ahead.
How deep do you inject that at Mydale? What depth?
1,500 meters.
What?
1,500 meters. Did you hear
It was
that?
1,500 meters was the response. Yeah. One right up here.
This might be for Ben. So in all those other,
One second.
yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. Actually, that's right.
I am Blake Russell. I work with the Dakota Nations on the development of their strategies and partnerships. So on worldwide, on all of those other carbon capture sites, has there been any incidents or any significant lasting impacts or learning from some of the worldwide sites or catastrophic events?
Yeah, catastrophically, no. You've heard of at least one. The Decatur project had an escape of CO2 above their confining layer, which was at 5,000 feet below the ground, and their monitoring system picked it up, and that's the only one that we know of, that I know of, where they've had technically a leak above the containment layer, but it didn't get anywhere near, like I said, it occurred just above 5,000 feet above the subsurface. But otherwise, I'm not aware of a single one in Australia, in the United States, Canada, Norway. They're subsea, so it's a little harder. No. Can't hear you.
There actually have been fatalities with CO2 escaping subsurface. So that is false. There has been catastrophic.
I have to disagree. I'll catch you after, and you can show me the ones that you're thinking of, and I'd like to hear about where you think they are. I have some slides on my laptop about the Mississippi case, and there's no fatalities actually. And that wasn't a CO2 project. That was a CO2 pipeline that had a bad well when it was installed in the 1950s. But it's not a CO2 storage project.
Hi, Sean Kirkpatrick. I'm a farmer in the area. My question is, after a year, 10 years, 20 years, what's your projected area that you're going to push the CO2 out into the formation? And I guess to add to that, what does your carbon do to that formation? And where I'm getting at that with this is, in our area, that zone that you're proposing to inject this stuff in, if it's like Iceland and it turns into a solid formation on top of that water, which I understand you're gonna try and do. Sinclair, we just had a test well drilled for rare minerals, and that is in that zone that you're proposing to technically ruin for that, which as mineral owners, we get paid for that oil. If they do find minerals, we would get paid for that, but you would ruin that for us mineral holders in the area. And I know my belt for sure because I've worked in the oil and gas most of my life. There is CO2 coming to surface because the weak link of the injection site is your man-made casing. And as far as anything underneath that plug, where they put that plug in that casing, it eats it. It may take 10 years, it may take 15 years, but you keep moving that plug up, eventually you're gonna have it to wellhead. And that's a proven fact, because I've been on wells out there that have blown up to top surface.
Sorry, I didn't catch your name, and there was a lot in that question, but really good points. One thing you talked about was the man-made casing. Totally hear you on that. I do want to say we're doing testing on all the materials we'll be using for both casing and cement to ensure that we're using corrosion-resistant material. And how far was the plume going to go? Thanks, Leon. We're in the middle. Part of the reason we haven't declared a site is that we're in the middle of our geological modeling and simulations to determine that. And it will be formation dependent. You mentioned we're looking at some formations that maybe have some overlap with other critical minerals or materials. That's a consideration for the final zone that we select as well. And all of these things will sort of fold together to tell the whole story on the extent of the plume and all of that you're asking. Was there anything I missed? What type of rock? So we're looking at both classic and carbonate reservoirs.
No, I said, in Mydale, how far has it gone out? Because I know it's over 10 miles, because we have a special zone now when we drill there. We have to bring in special equipment because you pressurize it to a dangerous zone, is what we've done. So the oil and gas industry deals with it every day out there because of that.
Like depressurizing that reservoir.
No, you're pressurizing
I can talk to you after, I can show you slides. The reason that okay, yeah, so the answer is.
Now, not after.
Yeah, okay, hang on. So,
No bullshit.
no, the Mydale example, you say 10-mile exclusion zone, that's because the pool itself is 40 kilometers across, right? So there is a large area now, and they're at 50 million tons of CO2. I think the plan here is about, 10,000 a year, the first few years, so up to that. So the answer about the radial distance depends on the rock properties, but it will be in the range of a kilometer or less. You saw the Aquastore project is out about 500 meters, okay? So that's, again, 600,000 tons after 10 years, broad radius. So it depends on the rock properties, it depends on the injection rate, all those things. So it's not a massive, 50 or 100 kilometer wide plume of CO2.
But does it pressurize more than where the CO2
Depends on the injection rate, yeah.
is? I guess.
And the rock properties, yeah. Now, the final part of your question there is, you talked about other resources. So the extract well is drilled for minerals in the Dupro. They're talking about using the Deadwood or the Winnipeg and the Winnipegosis, which are actually below that zone. Okay, so it's not going to be interfering with potential work that goes on above it in that layer.
Who's taking the liability if anything goes south?
Sorry, I just want to answer one more question about the rock and mineralization. There are many examples that are occurring in Alberta reservoirs right now where you both have formation water that is rich in lithium as well as a reservoir that is still producing oil and also being looked at for CO2 storage. So there is a world and a reality where all of that can occur within the same space. It does highly depend on the geology. The rock matters. So what they're doing in Iceland is volcanic rocks, it's basalt. So the mineralization process is very different there because it's very rich in magnesium. What we're talking about here are different types of rocks. So that's part of why we want to emphasize that the storage and the geology is really important. So that's my piece, and then
And just to answer that next question, so under the current regulations, all liability falls with the project developer, so in this case it would be Deep Sky. Yeah, sorry, current legislation, not regulations.
Ian Robson is my name, and I farm in the area here, grain and cattle, and speaking to Deep Sky, is your idea feasible? Because it seems like you're using a lot of public money. In fact, all money is public money, even something that comes from Audi. When I buy an Audi car, it goes through the tax credit system, right? Is that right?
So just for the capital expenditures on this project, we're eligible for the investment tax credit. The other 40% is covered by private funding. And then operations, all of that would be through private funding, or that would be the revenue that we make from the carbon credits.
Are tax credits given to those companies?
Not for the operations.
It's still tax credits, and it's our money because we're buying those products.
Well, respectfully, I disagree with most of that, because if like Microsoft is buying our credits at our facility in Innisfail, it's Microsoft and RBC that are providing the credits, which is their private money as a corporation.
A bunch of us are paying overpriced for internets too. But the thing is that can you break the laws of thermodynamics? Because you're talking about forcing fossil, like we're here tonight because of the fossil carbon. And we heard a speaker here explain the natural carbon cycle, which everybody lives on. I enjoy a good tasting apple that's made of carbon. But when you use fossil fuel, that is our problem, and you're only capturing a fraction, a minute fraction. And I think that it's very nice that you have money to spend, but I think your company would be much better off to spend it on projects that will actually reduce the amount of fossil fuel that we need to use. So you acknowledged that at the beginning of the process. So thank you for acknowledging that part of it. But let's get real here. This is a lot of money that could be spent much better, and it's one of the reasons there's a bunch of us standing here tonight, because there's a big number involved. But it's also because we're concerned about Mother Earth. And let's get real. Like, do you actually believe that your storage is going to make a bit of difference?
I think it's a good point, and it brings up that it kind of takes a terrific amount of energy to do this CO2 direct air capture. And as far as I'm concerned, if you want to live a net carbon neutral life, or if it's important to lower your emissions, you should lower emissions. It's way cheaper, it's way more effective to lower emissions. I'm in. There's a category of emissions that are called hard to abate emissions, like cement industry, aviation, where it's difficult to get that last like 10 or 15% of emissions, and that's what direct air capture has the potential to take that CO2 out of the atmosphere. But absolutely, the emissions should be lowered first and foremost, and as taxpayers, you guys should be pushing for lowering emissions overall if you want to have a net neutral economy.
You said potential. You didn't say positive. You haven't tested this problem. How are you going to guarantee us it's sucking all that carbon out? Potential. Where's positive?
Well, that's a good point. I mean, deep sky, yeah.
Can't hear what's being said.
It's over there.
Okay. Yeah, so, I
Not
mean,
so much a question, but a statement that, when you pressurize that zone, the only thing that's saving you is the integrity of that casing and that cement job. Do you realize that? Once it's under pressure?
Can you speak closer to the mic?
Do you realize that it's the integrity of that cement job on the casing that saves from blowing out on the outside? And then how do you control that when it's coming to surface on a bad cement job?
So there'll be a series of cement bond logs run,
Yeah,
just
right.
like a typical project, right?
Yeah.
And as I mentioned, rigorous testing done on both cement and
Okay,
casing
when
material that we use.
When that fails, when you pressurize that zone and that fails, what do you do then?
Sorry, like in what case are you thinking?
Okay, so you're pressurizing the zone where you're storing the CO2, right? Correct?
We will,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
over a large area, like these
So
are
the
porous
integrity
and
of the
permeable
case,
zones that
the
we're
cement job,
looking at.
The integrity of the cement job.
Right.
You're relying on that, right?
We're relying on the reservoir properties primarily
Right.
as a mitigation
No, that's
strategy
right.
to
No, for sure.
pressuring up the wellbore.
Right.
Yeah,
So when it's under pressure and that cement job fails, what do you do then?
you would abandon that well.
We abandon it. So how do you stop that CO2 from coming to surface?
So it would still be stored under the seal. Yeah, but eventually if
What
you,
seal?
the reservoir, there's the reservoir and then the seal rock.
You've punctured a hole through the seal, right? There's a hole through the seal. That's a hole that you're drilling.
Yeah,
That's right.
so like tell me, I don't know,
Okay. what's the
tell me
pressure-
about all the other
what's the
wells that are
pressure
drilled in
gonna be?
this area. Do you see that?
Absolutely.
And what do they
The
do?
casing rots.
And what do they do?
It's a problem.
What do you see?
Well, you're gonna have to cement it or abandon.
Yeah,
Okay. So
there's
you're not-
mitigations that you can approach those issues with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So another thing, let's look back 10 years with the Liberal government. And he promised
that super duper prime minister we had, that he was gonna plant millions of trees, right, to fight carbon. And what did he do? He put tampons in a man's back.
I don't think that comment is relevant to this conversation.
Carbon, didn't it?
I don't think that that's a relevant comment for this
It's not.
conversation.
Well, this is all about money. All about money up there. Nothing to do with carbon.
That,
I just wanted to add in a quick comment here in terms of making sure that as we go through and ask our questions respectfully, we be thoughtful about how we're asking our questions. And when it comes to your casing question, there are all kinds of pressure monitors and lists that we use to see the change before it actually happens. And so that's part of making sure that you've got all of those monitoring requirements and equipment and observations in place. It's something that we do on a day-to-day basis in all kinds of different operations. So it's something that would be taken into consideration and made sure that all the safety is up to speed.
I have a question.
Sorry, there's a question over here. Oh, sorry. Can you just wait?
Good evening.
Lots of questions. All right, you go.
My name's Dusty. I work in oil and gas as well as forestry. And fracturing is inevitable, as well as corrosion. I know it from working on the floor of a rig. It's just a matter of time. So you have to have like a pipe replacement, program in place, and you should have all these answers in place. Like you're putting our area at risk, which is reliant on agriculture, and $200 million could plant 200 million trees, which could sequester 6 to 8 million tons per year of CO2. And yeah, this project for 500,000, what scale of tonnage again? It's a really small scale on the world scale.
500,000 tons by phase 3.
That's about the gist of it. Fracturing's inevitable. You can't guarantee our formations are going to hold the pressures that you're going to impede on.
Thanks, Dusty. I totally agree, and that's something that we look at every day. And so we've already gone through a massive material testing program to know exactly what we're putting downhole and how that's going to react with the formation fluid. And we're testing different materials to make sure we don't see that corrosion downhole. You might think it's inevitable, and it might be with just basic carbon steel, but we're looking at nickel alloys. We're looking at really robust materials to avoid that. The fracture piece, that can happen when you're injecting and you're pressuring up a zone, but we're going to go in during our drilling program and we're going to do lots of geomechanical testing to make sure we're injecting below that maximum fracture pressure. So we want to stay below that. We're not trying to harm the formation. We want to operate within it, its capacity and its capabilities, and so that's our real goal there. I agree with you on the trees. Trees are great. The one piece about the trees, I think we do need a combination of everything, but the tree piece, there's a permanence factor that we always talk about, that trees, they burn up, that carbon goes right back to the atmosphere, they degrade, decompose, goes back up the atmosphere. Geological storage is for a very long time, but I do agree with you, so thank you for your question.
I'll just add two real more things. I agree completely, but your other comment is that the microseismic plan that you put in place makes sure that when you inject below the frac pressure, that you'll listen for any fracturing that's taking place both near the wellbore and far away from the wellbore. So that's exactly the reason that we put in microseismic monitoring. The second comment, I agree with you about, maintenance of wellbores and cement degradation and corrosion. Those are exactly why we have surface casing vents. And one of the instruments that gets run at Weyburn, it also gets run at Aquastore now, is a quad-mounted CO2 sniffer. that gets driven around the leases, and it can actually measure CO2 emissions from these wellbores, both the surface casing vent and anything coming out of the ground, in other words, around the casing bowl, etc. So that's exactly the point of developing a monitoring plan, to make sure that you detect those things. And then the other gentleman's question there was about what do you do when that happens? Well, if you can't squeeze it, add new cement there. If the corrosion, so the well logs, you're checking the corrosion in the wells as a routine sort of operational practice. If you cannot fix that, then that's exactly right. You have to basically abandon that and then re-drill it or do something else. But that's exactly the point of monitoring these things and making sure that there's no impacts. Okay. That's why we do this work. So.
Hello, my name's Dennis. I farm 30 miles away from here. My biggest question, like we're kind of the breadbasket of North America, and how much CO2 are we going to have a deficit for 50 or 100 miles around? Like you're sucking that CO2 out of the air. Like will it drop our crop yields? Like even if it's half a bushel per acre, that's huge. You know?
That's a really good question, and something that we've taken a look at Deep Sky Alpha. At Deep Sky Alpha in Innisfail, Alberta, we have a competition going on between different technologies. And we have technology number 1, right beside technology number 2, and we want to give them both a fair shot at proving that they're scalable and economical. And they're only separated by, I think, under 20 meters in between each. And each of them have ambient air going in. So one is taking in ambient air. Most of the CO2 is being left behind within the unit. It's expelling it out. And then 20 meters away is another unit that's operating off of ambient air. So that's how fast CO2 diffuses, like in the normal atmosphere. And on a windy day, it's much, much closer. So it's actually, CO2 diffuses very, very evenly and fast into the atmosphere. So the CO2 would not be depleted appreciably close to the site.
Thank you, Leon. And thank you for the questions. To this point, we have a few, we're going to go about 10 minutes over because we've got a backlog of questions. So we're going to go to this young woman next.
My name is Lee Jackson. I'm retired. I live here in Pipestone. So basically, I have no mineral rights. I used to be a farmer, blah, blah, blah. How is this going to benefit me in any way, shape, or form? My taxes are probably going to go up. Vanderhagen, I probably have that name wrong. I read there where we were going to need a bunch more people because we don't have skilled workers here, apparently. Where are these people going to live? Who's going to be building all these houses? Are these going to be in place before you start? When is your groundbreaking even? Do you have a date for that? And Sean, you made a comment about giving some report early 1Q 2026. I think it was early 1Q 2026.
So it was the timeline slide that I had pulled up. That was Q1 2026. That was for our site selection and our regulations being in place. What you might be referencing is called the Community Impact Report. And that is a report that we'll generate yearly just to show what contributions we're bringing into the community. So we will have increased tax revenue from this facility specifically, not necessarily increased taxes to the individual, but Deep Sky will pay taxes to the municipality that we operate in. So in theory, that should increase services within your community. There'll also be new professional jobs in the community, economic development. We're also going to actively invest in our community, or into this community, through that community contribution fund that's available as well. So those things will also be developing different STEM programs, so science, technology, engineering, and math, working with the local colleges and universities as well to make sure that people are trained and educated from this area to work at this facility as well. And then for as far as where people are going to live, absolutely, that's a concern, and it's a big part of my job, figuring that piece out right now. We are getting a bunch of quotes from different camp companies to develop a camp. There was like an old camp down in Melita. So that's an area that we're looking at right now to house employees there, as well as like other locations around where there's services available. We'll also be far exceeding provincial regulations for on-site healthcare to make sure that we're not putting any strain on the local healthcare system at all. And we're working on developing that plan, and as soon as it's at a place that we can share, like we get quotes from companies, we understand what this is gonna cost, what services are available. Those are the kinds of things that will be part of those community impact assessments as well. And then when we come to do our next couple community engagement events, we're hoping to come like with new information once we have the site selected, once we know where the camp is gonna be, once we know exactly the day that we're gonna be breaking ground. That's when we wanna come back and update the community. But like I said, that Manitoba@deepskyclimate.com email, like I'm the one who typically monitors that. So if there are questions that you're having that you want updates in faster, I can provide the most up-to-date information that we have. So we're looking at breaking ground in Q3 of 2026, is that right? Yeah. And with site selection happening in Q1. So waiting for that Manitoba Hydro Load Interconnection Feasibility Study and the carbon capture storage act regulations in place before we can move forward with formal site selection. Does that answer all of your questions?
You had one more question on the local labor force, and I do just want to say, Sean said it, I want to reiterate, we're looking for as many locals as possible to support this project. There's a number of you in this room that I've spoken to directly about working on our project, and that really excites us. So
How many people would be working in the building?
So over the course of the project, we estimate 700 to 1,000 construction positions over like the 5 to 6 year construction period. Once we're actually operating, probably around 50 full-time jobs. What would be the qualifications? All sorts of things, yeah. Like operators, primarily. So people with operating experience in oil and gas, that would be a big one. Some administrative folks as well, I'm sure.
Okay, Jason, do you have the next one lined up, Mike, or? Oh, thank you.
Hello, my name is Jason Hudson, and I farm by Lenore, which is north of here. And I guess I'm looking at your presentation, and I have some sort of systemic questions here, big picture questions. But first of all, I want to correct some information that was in your presentation. I think the very first one. You mentioned in one of the slides, the Gorgon carbon capture facility in Australia. Its goal was to put out or capture 4 million tons annually. So far, it hasn't even achieved half of that. In the first number of years, it was only 1/3 of that because of massive technical issues. And they had reservoir pressure issues. They had increased emissions because of they couldn't do it, so they had to emit the carbon that they had to capture, which increased the emissions. So that was one thing. The premise that you have that carbon dioxide can't be bad. In terms of farming, the Manitoba Climate Institute has noted that yields will actually increase with our principal crops with carbon in the atmosphere. And I think that's a very important point to make. The third thing I wanted to mention is that the Oxford Smith School of the Environment in October of this year did evaluated 25 years of carbon offset systems. And they found that most of the systems were completely ineffective in reducing emissions, that they lack transparency and regulatory processes. Now, the number one goal for this company is to sell carbon offsets. Is that not correct? Right. Or carbon credits. And so this study has shown that selling carbon credits or offsets to the systems that are available out there are ineffective, lack transparency, and they do not help the environment. So why are we going through all this? One other bit of information that you highlighted at the start of the presentation, you said that forest fires have increased. We actually have much less forest fires than we did back in 1990s. And that's not my data. That's from the Canadian National Fire Database. The total number of fires and the total area of fires is far less than the 1990s. So don't present information that creates a climate hysteria when it's not based in truth. And I find it ironic that the founders of Deep Sky, or the original founders, they made their millions through a travel app called Hopper and Airbnb. And of course they want to create or be part of a carbon offset system so they can satisfy their clients, or at least their former clients. I think that's the real reason why we're here.
Pump and dump.
Do you have any comments about this?
Next question.
How about answer it?
Go ahead, please.
My name's Kyle. I work locally here. This is a little bit off topic from the local area, but your guys' alpha site and what you went through to select it in Innisfail, what would that selection process look like?
Sure. Yeah, so thank you for that. So our facility in Innisfail, like Leon kind of alluded to, it's a testing ground for different technologies. So we can understand how well these technologies work in the Canadian climate, and just kind of how well these technologies have the opportunity to scale. So we did actually consider sites across Canada for that. One of the key reasons that we selected Alberta was Alberta had the Carbon Capture Storage Act regulations in place, which is key just to understand how you work through the Carbon Capture and Storage Act. And then we also put out like a call for proposals type of thing to municipalities in Alberta. And I can't remember exactly what organization that was through, but we received like 20 to 30 different responses from a number of municipalities, mostly rural municipalities across Alberta. And that just really showed the province's excitement to develop this. And as like anti any industry other than oil that Danielle Smith's government has been, she's been very pro direct air capture, carbon capture and storage. So just a really good environment to be operating in, and we see a lot of similarities to Manitoba as well.
My question is, why did it take 3 months for you guys to have this meeting when we've been asking since September 4th, since the meet and greet you had on September 4th? You say you're gonna bring 500 million to our area. How exactly is that gonna work? And have you reached out to any environmental companies on creating a plan on a clean out?
So sorry, what was the first question? If you could just repeat that? So yeah. So the first one was, why did it take 3 months to come back here? So we did our first presentation in early September here. That was before I joined the company. But what we were waiting for the next time to come back was have more specifics about the project. So where is it going to be located? What formation are you going to be injecting into? A lot of and that helps with a lot of the comments that we're getting, so we can like fully answer those instead of saying we're figuring that out, we have a plan, we know how we're going to approach it, but come back with specific answers of this is how we're going to approach it. And like I said, we have at least 2 more engagement events planned for before these major milestones once we have these things figured out. So that is my sincere answer to that. The other one was, what does that $500 million investment look like? So that's both to land purchase, facility construction, drilling, the direct air capture units themselves, different companies and services that will bring things to the area, our community contribution fund, long-term operations, things like that. And then the final question was the cleanup plan. So yes, we have been working with an environmental consulting company to be developing these plans, and that closure plan is part of our environmental act proposal. That is probably the biggest piece of my work, is developing this environmental act proposal in partnership with that environmental company, and that is part of what we submit to the regulator. And that license that we get after we submit the environmental act proposal, that's effectively our construction license and license to operate, which we have to adhere by and report against. And once we have that submitted, the government puts that out for public review and public comment, so it's something that all of you would be able to see, comment on directly to the regulator to make sure that it is both sufficient to the regulations, which is what we're doing, but also sufficient for what people in the area expect.
Okay, we got a question up here, and then we've got one back in the corner there, Jason, after.
My name's Graham, and I've been a resident here about the last decade or so. But so $500 to $750 million you got in private funding. My understanding is this is for big companies to purchase offsets that reflect their initial pollution. Krista, you touched on it earlier. It's human activity has increased carbon. Leon, you mentioned lower emissions. The logical step in my mind would be if there's 500, 750 million, that's pushing $1 billion. If this is available to gather for these big companies to offset their production, was there a barrier in place that prevented this kind of funding to just find a better way to more efficiently and effectively just reduce that pollution at its source, rather than building this big facility? We wouldn't have to do that if pollution itself was reduced. It seems to me it'd be more sense to spend that money directly there rather than creating other facilities.
So they're investing into and buying these credits to accelerate this technology and this space so that they'll lower their, if they have a target of net zero by 2040, they want to lower their emissions until they get to those hard to abate emissions.
But aren't they offsetting them with this type of with this carbon capture? That's just offsetting. Their production line of pollution is staying the same. Its actual production into the atmosphere is changing. They're going to buy these credits, and on paper, it's going to look better. But that doesn't benefit, Joe Blow. That benefits a big corporation.
You have to look at the individual companies on what their plan is to go to net neutral, but a lot of it, it makes more sense to lower emissions initially and take it down as far as they can go. And then once they are basically scraping the bottom of the hard to abate emissions, that's when they would go to direct air capture or other engineered solutions to get the CO2 out of the air. And then they would effectively be reaching net zero. But without it, you get down to the hard to abate emissions, and it's way more expensive than direct air capture, or it's somehow physically impossible just to due to making the steel or building the concrete or whatever they do to their facilities.
Hello, I had a question just for the group in regards to, you had mentioned that you plan to do 2 more community engagement meetings. I'm just curious, as of right now, in this current atmosphere, what your takeaway is right now, in the sense of if we are wanting to have a facility like this in our area, and if you were to proceed with those 2 engagement meetings, are you really listening to the concerns of the people that are actually living here? And if you had been, would you continue to proceed? And then the other question I have is just, in regards to, a lot of it I think is a pushback in the sense of it just doesn't seem like it makes a lot of sense because as I think Ben had mentioned, carbon naturally grows. So why would we then try to interfere with it as humans when, again, we could invest that money and that time and energy into something that could work for the greater good of all of us. I myself, I can't invest in this company. It's a private company. So what's the kickback for me? It just kind of seems like the government has come up with a problem and now they have come to offer a solution. So that's my takeaway.
Realize this is being recorded.
Yeah, so Keely, thanks for that. So yeah, I do agree that like public consultation is absolutely key. We have talked with many people tonight, like obviously here are a lot of people who aren't in favor, and that's absolutely fair. I understand where you're coming from. We've heard from quite a few people, both tonight at our previous engagement event and through our email, people who are either just welcoming us to the community, offering support, offering their company, themselves, looking for jobs, those types of things. We are hearing a lot of mixed feedback. But do agree, like if the community was like as very, very opposed to this, then we would definitely have to consider changing our plans of where and how we're going to develop this facility. There are opportunities for public comments and public consultation, both that the RM is going to have and the provincial government is going to have, so absolutely make your voices heard at those times. Sorry, Keely.
The CO2 in general, you need it for plants.
Yeah, like absolutely. The point of direct air capture is not to remove all emissions from the atmosphere. So currently there's about 430 parts per million of CO2 in the atmosphere, and that's significantly increased since the Industrial Revolution, which was around 230 ppm, is that right? So the point of direct air capture is to bring the CO2 levels in the atmosphere back to those kind of pre-industrial revolution levels where things like agriculture and those types of practices did exist and they were thriving. So that's the goal of just direct air capture as a whole.
If it works as well as it does, why can't we, just common folk, also invest in this technology then?
Well, absolutely you can. Like there's opportunities for the individuals to purchase carbon credits as well.
It's a GoFundMe page or whatever.
Yeah, like if Deep Sky ever became a publicly traded company, you would have that opportunity, or through other publicly traded companies that also exist in this space.
Did you ever, I asked you that at the last meeting regarding your carbon credits to purchase, and it does come up on your website as like a GoFundMe page. Did you ever figure that out or find out an answer for me?
Yeah, do you have comments about that? Like about what that, yeah. So just about that page that we have online where it's for the individual to purchase the carbon credits.
Yeah.
So that's a platform that's hosted by a different company that just uses a similar style to a GoFundMe page. Like in no way is that like an actual GoFundMe page for the company.
But it's set up as a donation. Like if I,
That's for an individual to purchase a carbon credit, not as a donation to the company.
from Deep Sky though, right?
Yeah, because we sell the carbon credits.
So that answers her. Okay, I have no idea. I am confused.
Hello, my name is Jason. I'm a concerned mineral owner. So you said that you can produce lithium, capture carbon, and produce oil and gas in harmony. So, but my take on it, as a mineral owner, the minerals, that like the Carbon Capture Act will probably sterilize my minerals if it's within the same zone, right?
So that is one thing, and that's one of the reasons why there's been a delay in the development of the regulations, because there's a difference between pore space ownership and mineral ownership. Pore space ownership exists in the Carbon Capture and Storage Act, and mineral ownership exists in the Oil and Gas Act. So it's understanding that relationship between the mineral owners and then the pore space owners, or the people who would be leasing the pore space from the Crown. and trying to understand how that works in the act. So it's something that I probably think about every single day that's going to be developed, and hopefully something that the regulator provides more clarity on, like very soon.
So there's probably more than one person in this room that's receiving the benefit of a disposal well or an injection well. After the government released this Carbon Capture Act, do they cease to exist receiving that benefit? I mean, this is a question for the government, but my take on it is that Carbon Capture Act was probably expropriating a sliver of minerals from probably everybody in this room. Because I think everybody in this room owns minerals. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be a question that's just better directed at the government, because we're not the ones that are developing those regulations.
Okay, so take it a little step further. By everybody agreeing to this, would it then say sterilizing the minerals? Do you know what zone you're injecting into?
Absolutely, we know what zone we would be injecting into.
What zone are you injecting into?
So there's 3 that are being considered right now.
So you don't know. You're still in the consideration phase.
Well, yeah, and that's why I said that we wanted to come back when we have more answers, and we will be.
What zone? What are your 3 zones?
Hi there. The Winnipeg Otis and the Winnipeg are our primary 2 candidates right now.
Okay. What's your number 3?
There's 2 primaries.
Lodgepole?
No.
Okay. Because you see where I'm going with that. You say the lodgepole. Oh, there's no oil right in this area today. So that's why I'm trying to nail your feet to the floor. Well, no, you got to tell people, hey, we changed our mind. We're going into the lodgepole, and 12 miles away, there's an oil well. So with your example, your Innisfield example, you said you don't know what you're going to do for casing, and you're still exploring that. But can you sort of nail that down? Because there's a whole bunch of people here that have run a lot of casing, and they're looking for answers. So you probably have an idea of what those technical aspects might be. Are you going to do stainless steel casing all the way down to the Winnipeg?
No, the goal would be to use a corrosion-resistant alloy closer to our injection formation. Most likely be just a carbon steel casing above that, where it's a safe zone with inhibited annular fluid and stuff inside. So we would look to the critical zones and make sure that's as robust as possible.
So Ben talked about the logging program. You guys never really spoke to the consistency, but are you going to develop the same type of logging program that they're doing in Aquastore?
Absolutely. We're trying to basically stand on the shoulders of the work that's been done before us, and so we're going to try to build on it and optimize it, make it more robust, but we're going to follow suit with what's been done and what's worked, definitely.
So are the
follow the standards, sorry.
The folks in Winnipeg, are they accessing the same information that the PTRC has built the standards for? Like, are they going to adopt the PTRC standards that they're doing for Aquastore?
Like, you mean the regulator?
Yeah.
Building out the regulations right now?
Yes.
I can tell you with 100% certainty that they're basing the regulations in Manitoba on again, other jurisdictions that already have these in place. So Alberta, North Dakota, British Columbia, they're leveraging all of those previously developed regulations to build the ones for Manitoba.
Okay.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. We've already gone about 25 minutes over.
My question is about water, probably the most important resource for most of the people in this room locally. I know Pipestone to be one of the driest places in Manitoba, but just below our feet. We're probably very fortunate, only 8 feet below us. I think it goes down to about 50 or 60 feet in the deepest part of the aquifer. I see
see that you're gonna use 0.18 meters cubed per ton of CO2. Let's scale that up to 500,000 tons per year. That works out to 400 acre feet. The aquifer under our feet right now is maxed out at 2,750 acre feet. Where are you guys gonna find the water per year, 400 acre feet, to run this facility?
So we are not targeting any surface water or drinking aquifers for the water, for the processed water for this facility. What we're targeting right now is a saline water formation that's about 200 meters below the surface. When we bring that water to surface, we'll have to put it through a water softener and treat it to be used in our processed water, but this is not water that can be used for potable water for drinking.
One more. We keep on saying that, one more.
Okay, we're gonna go one more, and then the Deep Sky team is gonna stick around after. So please feel free to come up and ask any questions, but please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Tanya Jackson. I live in the Tilston area. I have a question about insects and dust, which we have a lot of here. How does that affect your facility and its efficiency to do its job?
There's really basic filters before the dry air capture units, but the velocity is very low as it enters into it. So it would capture dust. I'm not sure about insects, but it'd be similar to like the inlet to a building HVAC system like that, pre-filtered. That's what would be in place before the units.
Okay, well with that, I think we'll wrap up the formal Q&A. The team will stick around.
For our native rights and everything like that that's going on, and we're closer to Pipestone, what does team of benefit out of it?
So we have the declaration of relationship in place with the Dakota Nation, which includes Chinoopa, and we're looking at ways for.
Could you define what communities? Are you talking about all 5 reserves or just Chinoopa?
No.
I see Sioux Valley come in.
Yeah, Sioux Valley is part of that, and all of the Dakota Nations are signed on to the declaration of relationship.
Okay.
And the point of it is to understand what meaningful opportunities there are for participation in the project. One of the key ones that I see is renewable energy development, for you to be the owner of the renewable energy facility when we get to that stage of the project, as well as opportunities through like this science, technology, engineering, and math, that community contribution program that I talked about as well. I would 100% be open to your community. And like things of that nature, opportunities for jobs, to provide services to different companies, maybe that either the band owns or the people that are members of the band also owns. They have opportunities to participate in whatever areas those could be.
Okay, so you're defining that the 5 communities are the Sioux bands. You're not defining this agreement with Grand Dakota Chiefs. Because you're terming 2 different terms.
Yeah, I'll pass that over to Blake just to help define that better.
Thanks for the question. So the initial declaration of relationship is based on the territory, the Dakota territory, and the original agreement was signed with the Dakota Grand Council, current Dakota Grand Council communities, but it's early stage. And this type of discussion has to go on in each community by community, and start to look at it and say, what can each community or the partnering communities benefit from? Could be some of the things that Sean was mentioning, or it could be the form of specific bringing things like ministerial loan guarantees from Ottawa, secure capital that are eligible for Indigenous communities. Trying to bring a little bit more capital into the region from Ottawa.
Because from my reframing, that the Grand Dakota Council is only brought up by 2 chiefs, Raymond Brown and Dakota TP. So those are the only two, he sits there by himself. Cause he never gave us any information on our reserve at all.
Yeah,
We
it's,
don't even know what's going on. Does he understand that you guys are digging around, that you guys are hurting Mother Earth? And I'm talking for all the ones that are in Sioux Valley, Burnthill, Dakota TV, Dakota Plains, Chanupoapa, we all don't know.
yeah, and it's just at the early stage, just at the very start. That's where to have a lot of these meetings and go through it.
There's no Grand Dakota Council.
What do you mean there's no?
Not recognized in any of these communities.
Yeah, well, I think we could come to the next meeting and bring that up.
Yeah, I could.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But by then
But
it's
for
too late.
myself, I'm not in agreement with it.
Well, I think everybody has come to this room with a lot of energy and a lot of really good questions and a lot of things for us to all think about. So I really appreciate everybody coming out here, and I wish you all safe travels home, because those roads were not awesome, and I suspect they haven't gotten much better. But thanks for coming out, and the Deep Sky team will be here to answer any questions you may have. If you want to talk about rocks, I'm happy to talk about rocks. But thanks again, everybody.